Toxic people don't fear your anger. They fear the quiet space you create when you no longer offer them a doorway into your emotions. There is something in silence that unsettles the ones who rely on chaos, because silence is a realm they cannot predict. It gives them no clues, no openings, no foothold to climb into your inner world. In your calm, their attempts to control dissolve. In your quiet, their strategies lose shape, and although you may not raise your voice, the stillness surrounding you speaks with a deeper authority than confrontation ever could. In the presence of toxic behavior, you do not need to fight. You do not need to meet force with force. You do not need to match intensity with intensity. What disarms toxic people is not your resistance, but your refusal to give your energy away. You become unreadable, and in that unreadability, you become unshakable. When noise expects noise in return, silence becomes a form of mastery. There are 7 quiet behaviors that instill this subtle fear in toxic people, not because you intend to frighten them, but because your peace reveals the truth they work so hard to avoid. Even when you say nothing, your silence trains your spirit. Even when you take no action, your restraint becomes a mirror they cannot bear to look into. The first behavior is simple. You observe everything but react to nothing. Toxic people thrive on your reactions. They seek the spark that turns into a fire they believe they can control. They want the agitation, the raised voice, the emotional unraveling. They want to see you pulled off your center, because if you can be moved easily, then you can be controlled easily. But when you remain still inside yourself, when you listen without erupting, when you notice every detail yet let none of it disturb your balance, their entire script falls apart. Your calm becomes a space they cannot manipulate. Your silence becomes a reflection they cannot escape. And the discomfort they feel is not caused by anything you say, but by everything you choose not to say. When you refuse to react, you force them to sit with the weight of their own behavior. And that quiet discomfort, steady and unavoidable, becomes the consequence they never expected. It is not punishment by intention. It is the natural result of facing the truth without the distraction of your emotional response. Your quiet awareness becomes a form of strength, a reminder that self-control is sometimes the most powerful message you can send. The second behavior arises from an even deeper understanding. You do not argue, you withdraw your energy. There comes a moment when you understand that engaging with a toxic person only feeds the conflict they crave. Explaining yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you accomplishes nothing. Arguing with someone who thrives on turbulence only exhausts the peaceful parts of your life. So instead of entering the battlefield they prepare, you simply step away from it. You detach. You let your energy return to where it belongs. Your inner stability, your emotional clarity, your sense of who you are. And when a toxic person realizes that you are no longer emotionally available to them, something inside them begins to panic. They feel the absence of your attention. They sense that their influence is fading. They can no longer pull you into the cycle they depend on. You win not by proving them wrong, but by refusing to participate. You do not try to change their mind. You do not attempt to correct their story. You reclaim your energy by not offering it where it will only be consumed. And in silence, you remain free. The third quiet behavior emerges when you recognize the value of your inner space. You choose distance over drama. Distance is a form of self-respect. It is the invisible boundary that protects your peace. Toxic people depend on proximity because proximity allows manipulation. But when you create space, emotionally, mentally, physically, they cannot reach into your life as easily. They cannot pull you back into chaos. They cannot weave themselves into your decisions or your moods. Toxicity fades in the presence of distance. When you are no longer nearby, the control they hope to maintain becomes impossible. They are left with their own noise, and without your participation, that noise becomes louder to them. Silence teaches them that their power only existed where you allowed it. You become powerful the moment you understand that access is a privilege, not a guarantee. And you do not need to announce this truth with words. Your distance says everything. The fourth behavior is one of the most misunderstood forms of strength. You stay kind even when they deserve coldness. Kindness, when chosen consciously, is not weakness. It is stability. It is clarity. It is the quiet decision not to let another's instability shape your character. Toxic people expect hostility. They expect retaliation. They expect you to break your own values in response to their actions. But when you remain composed, your calmness reveals their imbalance. Your steady breath exposes the chaos within them. Your kindness, measured and intentional, dismantles their entire strategy. You do not react, yet you do not harden. You do not fight, yet you do not bow. Kindness under control is power. It shows that you are governed by your own principles, not by their behavior. It shows that you are not easily influenced. It shows that your character remains your own, untouched by their instability. This is a level of strength they never expect. The fifth silent behavior emerges from wisdom. You let karma handle the justice. You no longer chase revenge. You no longer need the last word. You no longer exhaust your energy trying to make a toxic person understand the harm they create. You know that life itself reveals truth to everyone in time. You trust that people eventually experience the weight of their own actions, so you step back. You stop forcing outcomes. You let life unfold with its natural balance. And as you remain silent, you watch from a peaceful distance as the patterns they created return to teach them what your words never could. Not because you wish them harm, but because you understand that every action carries its own lesson. Your silence becomes surrender, not to them, but to the truth that the world corrects itself without your interference. And in that surrender, you find peace. The sixth behavior is a turning point in your evolution. You value peace more than people-pleasing. Control only works when you seek approval. Manipulation only succeeds when you crave acceptance. Toxic people rely on your desire to be liked, to be understood, to be validated. But when you no longer depend on their approval, their power dissolves instantly. The moment you choose peace over acceptance, you break the very chain that held you in place. You realize that not everyone deserves a seat in your life. You realize that being understood is not worth sacrificing your inner stability. You realize that your well-being matters more than fitting into an environment that drains you. And when a toxic person senses that you are no longer trying to please them, they feel the shift deeply. They can no longer influence your choices. They can no longer guilt you into compliance. They can no longer use your kindness as a tool to control you. In silence, you reclaim your freedom. The seventh behavior completes the transformation. You let them wonder what changed. You stop explaining yourself. You stop defending yourself. You stop clarifying your intentions to those who twist your words. You stop offering emotional transparency to those who have not earned it. And in that silence, you become a mystery. This uncertainty unsettles toxic people because they cannot grasp what they no longer understand. They cannot predict your moves. They cannot anticipate your thoughts. They cannot decipher your silence. And for a toxic person, not being able to read you is the deepest loss of power. Toxic people do not fear being exposed. They fear being ignored. They fear the moment you choose yourself. They fear the silence that reveals their illusions and strips away their control. Your silence does more than protect your peace. It unravels their entire illusion of power. It shows that your strength comes not from dominance, but from discipline. Not from force, but from awareness. Not from shouting, but from knowing when to speak and when to remain still. Stay calm. Stay private. Stay unpredictable. Your silence is not emptiness, it is mastery. And as you walk deeper into this understanding, you begin to notice that silence is not the absence of expression, but the presence of control. It is not emptiness, but mastery. It is a deliberate shaping of your inner world so that the noise of others cannot dictate the surface of your mind. What once triggered you now passes through like a wind that no longer shakes the branches. What once disturbed your peace now becomes a gentle reminder of how far you have grown. In silence, you train the mind to hold stillness the way water holds the reflection of the sky, without effort, without tension, without becoming. It mirrors. When toxic people lose the ability to affect you, something profound awakens within you. You start to realize that external behavior is nothing more than a teacher guiding you toward deeper self-understanding. Their chaos shows you where you were once reactive. Their manipulation shows you where you once needed validation. Their disrespect shows you where you once lacked boundaries. Their instability shows you where inner discipline was still forming. And as you become more aware, the dynamics that once pulled you into turmoil now become clear lessons in how to remain centered. In this process, silence becomes a shield, but also a mirror. It reflects your growth, your restraint, your rising awareness. It shows you how little you now need from those who once controlled your emotions. And it teaches you, gently and without judgment, that your energy is sacred. The more you value your inner space, the less willing you are to let someone disturb it. This transformation does not happen overnight. It unfolds slowly, like the strengthening of a muscle that has been inactive for too long. At first, silence may feel uncomfortable. It may feel like something is missing, like something is incomplete. You may feel the old urge to explain yourself, to justify your choices, to make someone understand. But as time passes, the quiet becomes natural. It becomes a soft companion to your awareness. It becomes a way of walking through the world with dignity and intention. There is a moment in every person's journey when they realize that reacting is optional, that explaining is optional, that defending is optional, that peace is a choice, not a condition controlled by others. And when you reach that point, toxic people can no longer take anything from you because you no longer hand them your emotional power. The silent behaviors that create this shift are not mere Ely techniques. They are reflections of a deeper internal alignment. Observing without reacting becomes possible when you have trained your mind to sit still like a mountain. Withdrawing your energy becomes natural when you recognize that not every battle is worthy of your spirit. Distance becomes necessary when you understand that proximity should never cost you your peace. Kindness becomes effortless when you know that another's instability does not have to disturb your own. Trusting karma becomes intuitive when you no longer rush the unfolding of truth. Choosing peace over pleasing becomes obvious when you begin to value your inner life more than external approval. And letting others wonder what changed becomes natural when you realize that you owe explanations only to your own conscience. Each of these behaviors requires a certain maturity of spirit, not the kind that comes from age, but the kind that comes from awareness. You begin to see that silence is not just the absence of sound, but the presence of understanding. It is the understanding that noise does not equate to strength, that loudness does not equate to truth, that confrontation does not equate to clarity, and that your energy is too precious to be wasted on those who cannot receive it with respect. As you embody these silent behaviors, new insights appear. You begin to notice how often people reveal their intentions through their reaction to your silence. When you no longer respond to manipulation, those who once controlled through emotion become exposed. When you refuse to argue, those who depended on conflict become restless. When you choose distance, those who relied on constant access become unsettled. When you remain kind, those who expected cruelty become confused. And when you choose peace over pleasing, those who depended on your compliance begin to lose their footing. Your silence becomes the environment in which truth reveals itself. People show who they truly are when you remove your reactions. Some will drift away because they were only attached to the drama. Some will grow angry because they cannot manipulate you anymore. Some will try harder to provoke you because your calm threatens their sense of control. But others, those who recognize your peace as a sign of inner strength, will respect you more deeply. They will see that your quiet is not avoidance but mastery, not weakness but intention, not passivity but discipline. There is something deeply powerful in learning how to remain calm around chaos. It is the equivalent of training your breath in the middle of turbulence. The mind wants to react, the emotions want to flare, the ego wants to fight back. But discipline teaches you that reacting is not the same as protecting yourself, that silence is not the same as surrender, that restraint is not the same as submission. True strength is learning how to remain rooted when someone else tries to shake the ground beneath you. As your silent behaviors deepen, your awareness expands further. You begin to understand why toxic people fear silence so intensely. They fear silence because silence reveals intention. They fear silence because silence removes the drama that once fueled their power. They fear silence because silence forces them to confront themselves, something they are not accustomed to doing. Silence becomes the mirror they have spent their entire life avoiding. When you stop explaining yourself, you take away the tool they use to twist your words. When you stop reacting, you take away the emotional energy they feed on. When you stop engaging, you remove yourself from the system they depend on. When you stop seeking their approval, you break the psychological leverage they held over you. Your quiet becomes the doorway through which you see into a different version of yourself, one that is calmer, wiser, more stable, more aware. This kind of transformation begins with small moments. It begins with one decision, choosing not to respond. One breath, choosing not to argue. One step, choosing distance. one reflection choosing kindness, one realization choosing peace. And once you gather enough of these moments, the shift becomes irreversible. You become a person who cannot be shaken easily, who cannot be manipulated easily, who cannot be controlled through emotional pressure. You start to realize that silence is not only a way of protecting yourself from toxic energy, but also a way of returning to yourself. It gives you space to think. It gives you space to breathe. It gives you space to see clearly. It gives you space to choose intentionally rather than react impulsively. Silence brings you back into alignment with your inner nature, and as your nature stabilizes, your life begins to transform. You become more selective with the people you allow into your space. You become more aware of the environments you choose to inhabit. You become more deliberate with your words. You become more grounded in your actions. You become more mindful of your reactions. You begin to move through the world with a calm strength that others can feel. Some will be drawn to this calm because they sense authenticity. Others will resist it because it exposes their own instability. Either way, your silence becomes a natural filter that separates those who belong in your life from those who do not. This is the quiet evolution of a person who has learned to protect their peace. Not through aggression, not through dominance, not through conflict, but through awareness, discipline, and inner clarity. You begin to recognize peace as something worth defending, not with force, but with boundaries. Not with fear, but with understand. Not through loudness, but through a steady, calm presence. And as this presence strengthens within you, a new kind of confidence emerges, a quiet confidence, a confidence that does not shout, that does not demand, that does not need to be seen to be real. This is the confidence of someone who knows themselves deeply, someone who understands their own value, someone who no longer bends to the instability of others, someone who has learned to stay calm in the face of chaos because their mind has been trained to return to stillness again and again. This is the essence of silent power. It is the art of remaining centered when others try to pull you off balance. It is the wisdom of responding only when response is needed. It is the discipline of knowing which energies deserve your presence and which do not. It is the maturity of understanding that not everyone can walk with you on your path, and not everyone should. As these lessons deepen, the world around you changes, not because the world has changed, but because you have changed in how you move through it. And as these lessons deepen, the world around you changes, not because the world has changed, but because you have changed in how you move through it. You begin to carry yourself with a quiet certainty that is neither arrogant nor defensive. It is simple, it is steady, it is rooted in the understanding that your peace is a responsibility you no longer hand to others. You start to recognize that maturity is not measured by how loudly you respond, but by how calmly you remain present. This new presence becomes the foundation of your inner life. With each silent behavior you embody, you discover that peace is not fragile. It does not crumble under pressure. It does not collapse in the presence of conflict. Instead, peace expands when challenged. It grows stronger in the silence that follows restraint. It becomes more resilient every time you choose not to react. And eventually, you reach a place where your peace becomes the default state of your mind, not the outcome of perfect circumstances. In this state of inner clarity, toxic behavior loses its power. What once felt suffocating now feels distant. What once triggered you now appears smaller, almost insignificant. The person you were before, the one who reacted, explained, argued, defended, feels like a version of yourself, who was still learning how to protect their spirit. And with compassion, you acknowledge that the old version did the best they could with the awareness they had. Growth reveals itself quietly. You notice that you no longer rush into emotional storms. You no longer feel the urge to prove your worth. You no longer need to convince others of your intentions. Your mind no longer trembles at the possibility of misunderstanding. Your heart no longer craves acceptance from those who cannot offer it. This is the strength silence gives you, a strength that does not need recognition to exist. As you continue walking this path, clarity sharpens even more. You begin to sense the difference between those who nourish your spirit and those who drain it. You see the subtle signs of manipulation long before they reach your heart. You recognize when someone is speaking from fear, from ego, from insecurity, and instead of absorbing their energy, you simply observe. You let their behavior reveal itself fully without reacting. Silence gives you the patience to see truth with new eyes. And when the truth appears, you respond with what honors your peace. Sometimes that response is distance. Sometimes it is detachment. Sometimes it is stillness. Sometimes it is kindness. But it is always guided by your inner clarity, not by the turbulence of the moment. You realize that peace is not passive. It is a disciplined form of intelligence. It is the ability to choose actions that do not damage your spirit. You start to understand why toxic people fear the silence of the self-aware. Silence removes the fuel they rely upon. Without your reactions, they cannot create chaos. Without your explanations, they cannot twist your words. Without your emotional involvement, they cannot control the rhythm of your mind. Silence leaves them alone with themselves. And for those who run from their inner truth, this is the most frightening confrontation of all. But for you, silence becomes freedom. It becomes the place where you return to yourself. It becomes the space where you process, understand, release, and move forward. Silence teaches you how to breathe again, how to observe without absorbing, how to love without losing yourself, how to give without emptying your spirit, how to care without sacrificing your well-being. In this understanding, a deeper compassion grows inside you. Not compassion born from weakness or naivete, but compassion born from clarity. You begin to see that toxic behavior often comes from an internal struggle others have not yet learned to face. You see that manipulation comes from fear, that aggression comes from insecurity, that emotional chaos comes from unresolved pain. And while this compassion does not excuse harmful actions, it frees you from taking them personally. Your silence becomes the bridge between acknowledgement and release. You recognize the behavior, but you do not carry it. You see the pain, but you do not claim it. You witness the chaos, but you do not allow it to enter your spirit. This is how you maintain your strength without becoming hardened. This is how you protect your peace without abandoning your compassion. As your understanding deepens, you begin to move through the world with deliberate intention. You choose when to speak. You choose when to stay quiet. You choose which energies to invite into your space. You choose what deserves your attention. You choose what deserves your silence. And every choice strengthens your inner balance. You start to notice that the more silent you become, the more clearly you can hear the subtle movements of your own mind. You hear the quiet whispers of intuition. You notice the gentle shifts in your emotional landscape. You recognize the moments when your spirit feels open and the moments when it feels constricted. You sense the difference between actions that elevate your life and those that pull you away from your center. Silence heightens this inner sensitivity, and with sensitivity comes wisdom, a wisdom that tells you when to let go, a wisdom that tells you when to stay, a wisdom that tells you when to walk away without anger and without guilt, a wisdom that tells you when to protect your peace, even if others do not understand your decision. Silence strengthens this wisdom because silence removes the noise that once clouded your judgment. Over time, your silence becomes your teacher. It shows you when to conserve your energy. It shows you when to redirect your focus. It shows you when a situation has nothing left to offer your growth. It shows you when someone's presence is taking more than it gives. It shows you when you have outgrown a pattern, a habit, a connection. And once you see clearly, you cannot unsee. Silence reveals the truth that words once obscured. This clarity transforms how you perceive conflict. You begin to see that not every confrontation is necessary. Not every disagreement deserves your attention. Not every misunderstanding needs to be corrected. Not every accusation requires a response. The ego wants to defend itself. But the aware mind understands that defending yourself to the wrong person only invites unnecessary suffering. Silence becomes your way of choosing which battles are worthy of your spirit, and most are not. This understanding frees you from exhaustion. It frees you from carrying the weight of other people's emotions. It frees you from the mental noise that comes from trying to explain yourself. It frees you from seeking closure in places where closure does not exist. It frees you from trying to be understood by those committed to misunderstanding you. In place of exhaustion, you gain presence. In place of noise, you gain clarity. In place of chaos, you gain stability. This is the beauty of silent self-mastery. As this mastery deepens, your life slowly rearranges itself. Relationships shift, environments change, habits dissolve, priorities realign, and you understand that silence was not just a behavior, It was an invitation to become someone new, a person who no longer seeks validation from the unstable, a person who no longer feeds into emotional traps, a person who no longer wastes energy trying to control what is beyond their reach. You become a person who moves through life with intention, with awareness, with a steady breath and an unshakable presence. And through this transformation, one quiet truth remains: toxic people do not fear being exposed. They fear being ignored. They fear losing the emotional access they once depended on. They fear your silence because it shows them that your spirit has risen beyond their influence. They fear your calm because it reveals their chaos. They fear your emotional independence because it ends their control. Your silence does not just protect your peace, it dissolves their illusion of power. It shows them, without a single word, that you have chosen a different path. A path of awareness, a path of discipline, a path of steady, mindful presence. So remain calm, remain rooted, remain private, remain unpredictable. Let your silence continue to guide you toward the version of yourself that stands unshaken by the noise of others. Let your quiet confidence become the armor that protects your inner world. Let your stillness become the teacher that shapes your next steps. And as you walk forward, carry this understanding with you. Silence is not weakness. Silence is not retreat. Silence is not surrender. Silence is clarity. Silence is growth. Silence is transformation. Silence is power. Let it become the way you live. Let it become the way you protect your energy. Let it become the way you rise above what once held you down. Let it become your strength.